We might get started now. So welcome everybody. I'm Sophie and I'm the General Manager at English Australia, and I have the pleasure of facilitating this afternoon's webinar. So before we get started, we'd like to acknowledge and show our respect to the traditional custodians of this land, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And we pay our respects to their elders past and present who hold the memories, traditions, culture and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And it's on their land that we learn and join this webinar today. So welcome to our presenter for today, Professor Averil Coxhead, and Averil is the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at Victoria University of Wellington. And Averil is very qualified to present today's session about academic vocabulary. She's authored and co-authored various publications about English for academic purposes, including a book called Vocabulary and English for Specific Purposes, and also Measuring the Vocabulary Size of Native Speakers. Averil also developed the academic word list as part of her master's thesis. So thank you so much for joining us today and for presenting this webinar, Averil, and I'll hand over to you now.
Kia ora, thanks so much, Sophie, and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here today. As you can hear, I'm a New Zealander, so I'll just keep a little short introduction here so you can get used to the vowel sounds. I'm based in Wellington, and I can tell you that today we started with a cold morning, a very sunny afternoon, and now it's raining. So there you go. Awesome, all in a day. So today I want to start by saying thanks so much to Sophie and to English Australia for inviting me here today. And I also wanted to let you know that there's another book which is in press at the moment, and that's the second edition of Introduction to EAP. So if you are interested in English for academic purposes, that book is co-authored with Diane Pecorari at the University of Leeds University, and that should be coming out fairly soon. We're getting the proofs this week. So I wanted to get started today by looking first of all at, there we go, a model of vocabulary growth, and that's coming from the Nation and Coxhead book that Sophie just talked about. And then I'm going to finish, look next at a couple of key questions. So what do learners and teachers need to know about academic vocabulary? And then some principled ways to increase knowledge and use of this lexis or vocabulary in English. And I've included a section on using generative AI in there as well as something to think about. And assessment is something that is going to come up, but there isn't really much work that has been done on assessment. So I need to make a note on that as well. There's something that I need to make sure that I address really clearly. I'll just write that down. Okay. And then I hope to have some time at the end for questions and some reflection. So let's get started. So I've included pictures of Aotearoa New Zealand, just so you've got something else to look at rather than just me sitting here on my planet with my planet behind me. So here's the first part of the talk looking at what do learners and teachers need to know. So in the book on measuring vocabulary size, Paul Nation and I put forward a model of factors that affect vocabulary size and growth. And what I want us to think about today as a group is to think, well, how does vocabulary for EAP fit? Now, in this model, you'll see that I want to see if I can hide view. Sorry. Okay. I wanted to point out a couple of things. First of all, and you'll see right across the top is age. So one of the best pieces of news that you might hear today is that as you grow older, your ears grow bigger and so does your nose, but so does your vocabulary. So from the research that we've done looking at people's vocabulary size, measuring it at different points of different people's lives, and then looking at it overall, the people with the biggest vocabulary sizes tend to be older. So that's something to look forward to. That's great. So that lies across the top because it covers everything. At the bottom, you'll see the statistical nature of vocabulary. So we know things about vocabulary in languages, such as Some words appear much more often and are used much more often than others. Those words are called high frequency vocabulary, and they are common in English for academic purposes as well. So one of the things that we also know about the statistical nature of vocabulary is not just frequency, so high frequency, mid frequency, low frequency, don't see them very often. We also know that when you get two-word collocations, so words that occur together, or 3 or 4 word strings, usually those words occur together because they statistically belong together. So there's a mutual attraction, they belong together. So another element of statistical nature of vocabulary is that it's not just by chance that you get words like statistical significance occurring together. These words occur together, and we can show that through the statistical relationship between them. So you've got two parts of the model that go across everything: age at the top and the statistical nature of vocabulary. In the middle, you can see that feeding into each of these into age is what are the social and personal factors of people. So if you come from a household where there are lots of books and you tend to talk about ideas and there's lots of input and there are things going on, then that feeds into your vocabulary size. One of the things that I've found in life experience is when I've tested people on their vocabulary size and had some fairly young adults testing really, really high on their vocabulary size score, if you talk to them, they'll say things like, oh, I play massive online multimedia multiplayer games. And you're like, so what's so special about that? And then you think about it and you go, ah, so you spend a lot of time, you interact with others when you do this, you get lots of input, you get lots of output. So there are lots of opportunities for input and use of the language, and that's really important. So through their life experience and the things that they're doing, that feeds into your vocabulary size. So if you have an interest in dinosaurs, that feeds into it, absolutely. And then if that life experience also includes lots of opportunities for input and use, that's fabulous. And then the conditions for learning, things like repetition, things like space retrieval, so that you get lots of encounters, but you have to think about these words. What's the form of that word? What's the meaning of that word? So this model we put together for general vocabulary size and growth, but I think it also relates to English for academic purposes. So one of the common quotes about English for academic purposes is that nobody's a first language speaker or native speaker of English for academic purposes, right? So what are the social and personal factors that have an effect on the vocabulary that people have? What are the subjects that they've studied at school? Because we know that the more that students know about a subject area, the more likely it is that they'll know the vocabulary related to that subject area. What's happened in their lives? Have they traveled a lot? Have they read a lot? We had a student who's 13 years old, and his vocabulary size, he's at a New Zealand secondary school, first language speaker of English, and his vocabulary size score was really impressive. And when Paul Nation, my mentor and a great leader in this field of vocabulary studies, he sat down with this young man and said, so, tell me about yourself. So what do you do? What do you like? Tell me about your life. And he said, I read a lot. And Paul said, oh, what are you reading? He said, oh, mostly quantum physics at the moment. So there's a reason why people might have a large vocabulary size. All of these factors that fit into this model are really important for considering how students, the background of students, what they've done in their lives, and therefore how they might have developed or what might be missing in their academic vocabulary knowledge, or how well they're going to prepare for university, or how well they might be able to take part. So one of the things I really wanted to do to start with is to present this as a way of thinking about who our students are, what their needs might be, what's in their background, what are they interested in, what opportunities have they had, and where might we help learners with developing their academic vocabulary knowledge and use in English. Okay, I'm going to move on to this idea of vocabulary size as well, because this is really important when we think about English for academic purposes. So Jim Milton, may he rest in peace, suggested that learners need about 3,000 words minimum. But in the research that we've been doing here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and here at Victoria University of Wellington, we've been looking at academic written text, for example, and thinking, is 3,000 words enough? Don't learners need more? And we found when we looked at academic written texts, learners need between 5,000 to 8 to 9,000 word families. So that's not individual words, that's group of words like analyze, analysis, reanalyze, analytical. So a word family to reach 98% coverage. Now, 98% is important. If learners recognize 98% of words in an academic text, it's good for their comprehension. So the more you recognize, the better you're going to be able to understand a text. 98% is pretty close, right? It's pretty close to 100. That's great. So the way we think about this is by saying, well, if they know 98%, then they should be doing pretty well on their own. Now, 95%, which is that first figure at 5,000 word families, 95% means they're doing pretty well, but they need a bit of help. Now, one of the things that we've done when we've analyzed written text in particular is blocked out words to represent when you've got 95%, when you've got 98%. And it can be quite shocking how much content can be missing if you don't know a lot of words in a text. So if you've got a very difficult text, think about it from a learner's perspective and think, what's their background knowledge? What do they already know about this text? Do they know this in their first language? Have they studied it in their second language? Are there lots of words here that they don't know and they won't recognize? So therefore, am I setting them up for failure? Now, the next bit of information, which I think is really important, is when we think about spoken academic texts, what do we find? And it might be a surprise, but actually for 95%, you need about 4,000 word families. This includes proper nouns and marginal words like and are, for example. So 95% coverage is at 4,000 and 8,000 for 98%. So again, 98% is you're doing pretty well. You'll probably be able to understand the text from a vocabulary perspective. And then 95% is you probably need a bit of help, but that's pretty good. So I really wanted to emphasize here that we've got some challenges when it comes to students who might have a very small vocabulary size in English. They might be very ill-equipped. So they might need to go away and do some learning of general vocabulary first before they start tackling academic study and preparing for university. Depends. Now, I know that there are some other aspects to academic vocabulary which are really important, and I'm just trying to drip feed things through. So hopefully I'm not going too fast. So one of the other things about vocabulary is I'm talking here about single words that occur on their own as well as multi-word units. So we do have research in English for academic purposes in terms of vocabulary which looks at single words. And we do have more and more research happening about multi-word units. So one of the things I just said right at the start when I was talking about assessment of academic vocabulary, we do have some existing tests, for example, with Diane Pecorari from Leeds University testing academic vocabulary knowledge. There's not so much on multi-word units, but we do have one of my former PhD students, Hang Nguyen, she developed an academic collocation test, and I can tell you more about that in the chat. So learners can have some struggles when learning and using academic vocabulary. So we know that vocabulary is everywhere, right? So one of the things which I think is really important is we know that vocabulary is essential in all of these skill areas, particularly in English for academic purposes, but for everyday language use as well. But we also know that vocabulary can get a bit hidden. So in an academic writing class, for example, we know that learners need to use vocabulary, but we might not spend much time helping them with vocabulary use. And some of the work I did years ago in my PhD research was to talk to learners about the vocabulary that they were using and what they weren't using when they were writing in English for academic purposes. And really what I found in that research was that learners were highly conscious of the importance of vocabulary. They were very risk averse in using words that they partially knew in English. So if they partially knew it, they would try to avoid using those words. If they felt like they had really good knowledge, then they were very happy to use those words and often potentially overuse them as well. We know that people who have a large vocabulary size are usually more proficient than learners with a small vocabulary size. That kind of makes sense, right? We also know, as I've just said, that learners may not and teachers may not really pay attention to vocabulary in a principled way or understand that it's important to do that. And then We also know, and you'll know this as well, that we tend to have better recognition vocabulary sizes than production. So we tend to rely on the same words that we use all the time. We use the more frequent words more often. And one of the challenges might be for learners that is really trying to move their language into using more academic vocabulary in their academic writing. Not so much in their academic speaking, because we know that there's fewer academic words get used in academic spoken English. You can find out more about that by reading Yen Dang's work at Leeds University again. But one of the challenges might be that there's a lack of confidence. They might recognize vocabulary, but don't feel that they've got enough language to actually use it, or it could be that they're not getting enough support and encouragement to do that. In English for academic purposes research, we've found Kimberly Shelder did some research in Norway where she was relating English grades, so that's English language grades in English language classes, and looked at academic vocabulary scores, and the people who got high English grades got higher academic vocabulary scores from tests of academic vocabulary just in general. I thought you might be interested in that research as well. Now, what happens if we say, what about textbooks? So we know that academic vocabulary is challenging. We know that you need context, and we know we need resources, and we know we need support. Do textbooks do any of this work for us? What we found in some analyses of vocabulary in EAP textbooks, or textbooks that were being used for EAP in China and in Indonesia, was low frequency words like viperine in text. I've never used the word or needed the word viperine. I don't know about you in your academic text. We also found that there were lots of items that appeared only once. That makes it difficult to learn words, because if you only see them once, it's very hard to remember them. We found that actually that background knowledge that you needed to understand words was really, really important, particularly when the textbooks had one unit on snakes, and then they had one unit on the economy and another unit on the environment, for example. So the kind of pockets of academic vocabulary and the knowledge that you need in order to work with the textbooks meant that you had to jump. So there wasn't a lot of development of vocabulary in terms of looking more in depth at a particular subject area, or making sure that learners had the opportunity to use that vocabulary as they were working or encounter those words more often. So jumping topics was something that was really important. All of this means that there's low potential gains for vocabulary learning. And we also found that there wasn't much focus in general on multi-word units or word strings. And English is about, depends on whose research you have read, but anywhere between 35 to 50% of the English language is made up of multi-word units, including a lot of the stuff that I'm saying today. Okay, now I thought you might be interested in some of the research that's looked at levels of vocabulary knowledge amongst EAP learners, and all of this research is carried out in English as a foreign language context. You get things like in Taiwan, in an early study by Webb and Chang, Indonesia by a couple of studies there, and more recently in China as well, looking at vocabulary levels knowledge. This is general English, where only 5 students out of 265 showed mastery, or that means they scored well enough to reach mastery level at 3,000 word families. Now, remember early on, I said you needed, Jim Milton, may he rest in peace, said we need about 3,000 word families. And I was saying, yeah, it's more like 4 to 5. If only 5 students showed mastery of the first 3,000 word families, so that's high frequency words in English, we've got a bit of a problem. And then most students in that study didn't show mastery of the most frequent 1,000 words of English. So we've got a bit of a gap going on here. Now, just before you think, hang on a minute, that's only in the Asian context, we've also got a small study in Denmark that showed much the same thing, and an international school in Germany, some work that I did with TJ Butterwick and another colleague, tracking the academic vocabulary development or knowledge development over time in an international school. Great thing that study showed was that even the students who started with low levels of academic vocabulary knowledge over the course of their years at the international school, they really caught up with their classmates who had higher academic vocabulary scores than them right at the start. Nobody actually caught up to the levels of the first language speakers of English in the class, but they got pretty close. So I think that what the classes were doing, what the teachers were doing, was working really well in that context. There's also been some research on teacher knowledge of general academic vocabulary, and this is a new area of research as well. It depends very much on the context. So in Iceland and Indonesia, two contrasting studies there. Icelandic teachers, a lot more exposure to English than in the Indonesian context. It was also interesting in the Indonesian context where we didn't track, but we tested teachers who were newly out of their university studies and now teaching in back in their home context, compared to teachers who had been out of their teacher education context for longer. And what we found is the ones who were fresh out of their university and teacher education, their scores were higher than the teachers who'd been away for a long time. It depends on the first language background. Of course, that makes perfect sense. So in the Swedish context, for example, this study showed that the people who come from cognate backgrounds, English, so Romance languages, Italian, French, things like that, they scored higher. And this receptive or productive knowledge, again, the research on vocabulary knowledge of teachers shows that the teachers in that study by Malmström, etc., they found that the receptive level was much higher than the productive knowledge. And if you've ever done a productive vocabulary test, it can be very difficult to, it's like you get a gap fill and you have to fill in a word. That means you've got to not only understand the context, but you've got no clue as to what those words might be. And it's quite hard to measure. Okay, I need to move on. So one of the key things I need to mention today for you is this idea of frequency. And I've said that some words are more frequent or appear more often than others. So for example, if we ranked these words in order: banana, do, familiar, furthermore, happy, hitherto, or like, and I'll give you 10 seconds to do that in the chat first. Which words do you think are the most frequent? Sophie? I'm going to have a look in the chat. Yeah, do and like. Exactly. Least frequent, what do you think? Man, you guys are fast on typing. Yeah, hitherto. I only use hitherto when I'm making a joke. I don't know about you. The second thing about frequency, which is really important, is these bands of frequency that I've already talked about. So this is based on early work by Michael West, may he rest in peace, and now we've got a great set of work by Professor Paul Nation, who Paul's put together 1,000 frequency bands going from the first 1,000, which is the most frequent, right up to the 30th 1,000 word family. You can find those word lists on Paul Nation's website. Sophie, you might be able to help us find it. So those lists are called Paul Nation's BNC COCA lists, so based on huge corpora. And there are a couple of things that are really important about high frequency words. One is, when we mean high frequency, we usually mean the first and second 1,000 words of English. So do and like are in there. Usually those first 2,000 word families cover about 80% of a text, including around 70% of academic written text, roughly. There are function words there, and there are also content words there. And you'll see that some of those words are also academic in nature. So it includes words like area, for example. So one of the ways, so you've got high frequency vocabulary, these words occur most often. Next comes mid-frequency vocabulary, and it's a bit argued between, is high frequency first, second, and third 1,000, or is it just first and second? So first to third 1,000 roughly is the high frequency. Then you get mid-frequency, so occur less often. And then you get low frequency, which is usually below the 9,000 word family group. And you can see, when you look at frequency analyses, you can see that the high frequency of the words are the ones that do most of the work, right? Okay. So in EAP, we've divided, following guidelines by people like Ken Highland, we've divided vocabulary into English for general academic purposes and English for specific academic purposes. And I'm going to move on and talk about those briefly now. Cue the flowers. Oh, and I need to say, academic vocabulary can occur in high, mid, or low frequency bands. So just because a word is academic doesn't mean it's not high frequency or doesn't mean it's not mid frequency, right? So that's important to say. So academic vocabulary sits across those frequency bands. Most of it occurs in the high frequency bands. So we can look at, for example, lists of useful words. So these are words that occur across academic disciplines, and they are shared across those different areas. So they're general in nature, but they're still academic. And the reason why we know they're academic is because when we do an analysis of, for example, the academic word list research that I did years ago, when you take the academic word list and then you run it across a fiction corpus or a newspaper corpus, for example, you'll see that they don't occur as often in the fiction corpus, but very, very rarely. And you see that they occur in the newspaper corpus, but nowhere near as often as they do in the other areas. And in my research, I found that the academic word list that I created covered about 10% of the academic written corpus that I put together and 8.5 of the second corpus that I put together. Now, the key thing I need to say about the academic word list is I did not include the first 2,000 words from Michael West's list. So in hindsight, that was a mistake. And the reason why it was a mistake, no, why did I make that decision? I decided that students who are coming in to study English for academic purposes to get entry to university would know the first 2,000 words of English. So that was one thing. And we know from the testing research that might not necessarily be true. The second thing was, at that point, I wasn't thinking about high frequency vocabulary also being academic vocabulary. In other words, that there are words that are high frequency words that can also be academic. So Gardner and Davies did some follow-up work in the 2010s, early 2010s. They created another academic vocabulary list. It's a bigger list than mine, and it contains high frequency words as well. So their coverage of their list is about 14%. If you're interested in their work, there's a really wonderful vocabulary website, academic vocabulary website. Academic Vocabulary Info is what it's called, based on their work. It's wonderful. Okay, excuse me. So some examples of general academic word list. I've mentioned Gardner and Davies. My academic word list sits on our university website. You're more than welcome to check that out. You can also find on the website EAP Foundation, you can find the academic vocabulary list and the academic word list. You might be interested in the academic formulas list from Simpson, Black and Alice. And what they did is they followed the similar principles of how I developed the academic word list. And they looked at formulas. So that's they looked at items from academic written corpus, so the ones that occurred mostly in the academic written corpora. They looked at academic spoken, and then they looked at the ones which were in common of spoken and written. It's a really interesting list. Do take a look at it. The academic collocation list is quite large by Ackerman and Chen. You can find that as well on the EAP Foundation website, and that's 2-word collocations. And you can download the academic collocation list by grammatical collocation, so noun plus noun, adjective plus noun. You know, you can look at it from that way, or you can look at it from a frequency perspective, I think, as well. And then there's the link for the EAP Foundation website. There's also the spoken academic word list. So that's from Yen Dang now at the University of Leeds, and I was her PhD supervisor along with Stuart Webb. You can find, I'll send Sophie the PDF of this talk, and she can send that out to you if you want to find those links, or copy them and paste them now. Now, I've been talking about English for general academic purposes, and then we do have English for specific academic purposes lists as well. And these are words that occur mostly in a particular discipline or subject area. They are more technical than general in nature, and we'd see that in their occurrences and their frequency, that they tend to occur more often in one area than another area. They're likely to be content carrying words and less likely to be known by people who don't know much about a subject. So one of the things that's important here is when I talk about academic purposes vocabulary, often people who are not EAP practitioners think about academic vocabulary as being long, really technical words, Greco-Latin in nature, very difficult words. And I really need to say that actually most of the vocabulary I'm talking about today tends to be more high frequency vocabulary, common in collocations. We often use these words together. Yes, there are some long Greco-Latin words, absolutely. But actually, when you look at the text and you look at the kind of vocabulary, one of the issues for learners might be that they already recognize words like statistically significant, but they might not know that those two words belong together and that that has a meaning. They create a meaning of their own from that. So there are examples of specific academic word lists. You've got a science one, which was really tiny. It's a tiny list, but it's very powerful. That was based on work that I did with David Hirsch, who's now at the University of Sydney, has been for for maybe a decade or more, maybe two. And what we did is we looked at the academic word list, and then we built on that for the science lists, created a bigger corpus. There's a chemistry list which is available for you. There are more medicine lists than I can even imagine, but there's a good example of one. And there are several engineering lists as well. This is not an exhaustive list. There are several computer science lists available as well. And Green and Lambert have done some really great work looking at secondary school vocabulary, and what they've done is single word unit lists connected to chemistry, biology, economics, the subjects you can see there, but they also have multi-word unit lists. And all of that work is also available on the EAP Foundation website, along with some tools which you might find really helpful. Things like word clouds, highlighter activities, gap filler activities, and I think I've got some examples of those for you to take a look at as well today. Okay. All right. So far what I've done is said, so what are some of the things about English for academic purposes vocabulary that people need to know about, teachers and learners? What might be some of the issues? I've just mentioned some word lists, and there are issues with word lists as well that we need to think about. So things are like, when you're working with word lists, you should concentrate on high frequency words first, because they're the ones that occur most often. So if there's a word list that's ranked by frequency, take a good look at that. It's really important that you don't start on word lists alphabetically, because English isn't like that. So we don't learn all the words that start with A and then all the words that start with B. It's not like that. It's frequency driven. So when you're looking at word lists, think about not just the form of the words, it's really the meaning is primary, and then the use of those words, so that they're encountering vocabulary in context and having opportunities for using these words. You have to think about the purpose of the list, who made it, why, who were they thinking about, what suggestions do they make for teaching and learning? And then try and use activities like word cards, for example, to help with actually working with the words. Word cards are great because if you have the word written on one side and the meaning or the translation on the other side, you can't see through it, which means the brain has to do some thinking. So it's an old school activity you can find online. I think Anki is the name of the of one way of using word cards using a computer-based system. Fabulous. Okay, I'm going to take a quick drink. Is there? We've reached about halfway. We're going to have to hurry, so I'll give you a quick chance to have a drink of water too. Okay, so let's move on to teaching and learning these things. So I wanted to ask, and you could use the chat for this. Here's an activity. How effective might this be for learning vocabulary and retaining vocabulary? So on the left-hand side, you see a very happy deer who's saying, thank you for 2 great terms. It was to be your teacher. Is the answer torture, misery, pleasure, or discomfort? This is a Kahoot activity. How effective do you think this is going to be? So if 0 is not effective at all and 10 is fabulous, what do you think? Go. I'll give you half a minute to put some answers in the chat. Oh, it's a mix of answers. Great. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk very briefly about what might feed into or help retention of memory for vocabulary learning. And then I want you to apply a technique for measuring it, and we'll see. So these are a whole lot of, I come from a farm, so it's quite nice to have cows and presentations, and these guys are all looking pretty good. So how can we decide? So what helps vocabulary knowledge? So the technique feature analysis from Paul Nation and Stuart Webb, which has just been updated by Paul Nation, focuses on 5 main areas. One of them is motivation. Now, that doesn't mean I'm super excited to be learning vocabulary. I'll show you soon what it means. A next element is noticing. It's hard to learn something if you haven't noticed it. Another point is retrieval. So that's when you're looking on a word card, for example, if you're looking at the form of the word, then you have to retrieve or think about the meaning, which is on the other side. Generation is that opportunity for use or encountering words in your reading and listening. And then what helps with retention. So here's an activity. This is a sentence writing activity, and it uses the technique feature analysis, which I'll tell you about in just a second. So here are the instructions for the learners. This probably looks like something that you've seen before in a textbook or seen before in a classroom activity. So you're asking the learners to write an original sentence, and they have to use each word. Now notice for each of those words that the meaning is given in brackets next to the keyword that people need to use in writing. So now I'm going to show you the technique feature analysis. Those 5 areas are down the left-hand side, right? And there are questions that relate to each of those areas. You'll note that retrieval has got 5 questions and retention's got 4. The other areas have got 3. Okay, now I said that motivation is not, woohoo, I'm motivated. It means, is there a vocabulary learning goal? Does it motivate learning? Does it make people think about learning? How does it do that? Do the learners select their own words? We know that it's more motivating for learners if they select their own vocabulary. When it comes to noticing, does it make people focus attention on target words? Does it raise the awareness of new vocabulary learning? Does it involve negotiation? Do learners have to work together to solve something or do something which is related to the vocabulary? Research by Jonathan Newton, my colleague here, I'm pointing to the building next door. Jonathan Newton's work shows how learners negotiating together increases their capacity for noticing and therefore learning. Retrieval is about that. If you can see the form, you're trying to figure out what the meaning is or remember the meaning, or you've got the meaning and you're trying to remember what the word is. Is that productive retrieval? In other words, you're producing the word, or is it recalling the meaning? Are there multiple retrievals of the word? So that builds memory. And I think about that like the first time you drive somewhere, often it seems to take a long time, but then after you've driven maybe 5 or 6 times, you arrive and you think, oh, I don't remember driving. I now know my way. I'm not looking for the markers. I know what I'm doing. Spacing between retrievals. If you try and retrieve the meaning in the form of words, often at the beginning of your learning, you need lots of retrieval opportunities. And then as that memory gets stronger, you don't need as much. You can have more time between those retrievals. Generation's about using these words in speaking or writing, or encountering them in new ways in reading and listening. Do you have to write? Do you have to speak? And is there a change in the context is the next one. Last is around that retention of memory. Is there a successful linking of form and meaning? Does it involve examples? Does it involve images? And do the words interfere in any way? So interference means if there are words that look the same or sound the same, then it's easy to mix them up. Or if they are opposites of each other, it's easy to mix them up. So you've got these 18 questions. Now, here's the activity, right? The score is 0 for nothing. 1 is yes, it's there, right? So I've got the instructions for you on that side, and I'm going to give you a minute now to go have a look through and have a think about what your score might be for this activity. And you can use the chat to say, well, do you think that there's retrieval here? Is there motivation here? Is there successful retention? What do you think? So use the framework. I'll take another quick drink. We're going to do this fast, folks, because we're going to run out of time. Okay, go. Hopefully you know what you're doing. So you might notice, for example, that they have to write. So that's generative use. Yes. Productive. Yes. You've got that right. Do the words look the same or sound the same? No, they're quite different. Take a look. See what you think. Go. Okay. So you've had a chance to think. That's good. Now let's look at the score from Nation. And I think this is from Web actually. Now take a look here. You'll notice in the middle, retrieval, there's nothing. Can you see that? There's no retrieval of the word. You could see the meaning and you could see the word itself. They're side by side, right? If you look at motivation, it scores a 1 just in the top. We've got a vocabulary goal that learners don't select their own words. We've given it to them. Not much motivation of learning. There's a focus and noticing of retention of words, and it raises awareness of words. Cool. Generation, the score down there is 3 out of 3. Awesome. Retention, yeah, linking form and meaning. There are no examples. There's no imaging. The words don't look the same. So there's a little chance of people getting mixed up between those words. So the total score is 8 out of 18. Okay. I'm going to show you another activity, and your job will be to score this activity. Now, here we go. So you'll see that there are images on the right-hand side. These are all animals in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So your task is in pairs. Each student has an animal. Their job is to look at a picture of their New Zealand animal. They've got to describe it to somebody without showing the picture. You have to use the vocabulary from an earlier activity on describing teachers. You can't show the picture. The teammates have got to draw what you've described. So we've been doing a unit of work on these animals. We might have been doing a scientific study of them, for example. And the aim is that I'm describing, for example, my picture, and you are doing the drawing, and then you've got a picture and you're going to do the same thing with me. And we're going to do that several times across the class. And then you want to make sure that the picture matches the description that people have given you, right? So if we score this activity, let's go back. So clear vocabulary goal. Yep. Motivation of learning, quite high. The learners select the words. Yes. Focus. Yes. Raises awareness of new vocabulary learning. I'm not sure, because it's kind of practicing what they already know. Is there any negotiation? Yes, between the learners. Do they have to retrieve the word? Yep. Got to use it. Yep. Is it recall? Yep. Multiple? Yep. I'm doing this often. Is there spacing? Kind of, yeah, but then we don't have any evidence of longer spacing. Is it generative use? Yes, they've got to use the words. Is it productive? Yes, absolutely. And is there a change in context? Yeah, I guess so, because you're saying this. So this is this picture, and it takes it away from the context where they've met it before. Linking form and meaning. Yep. Instantiation, examples, not so much. Imaging, yes. Avoiding interference, yes. Okay. So there are ways that we can use this technique for understanding what's going to help. Now, a study that's in preparation. No, we've done the study. It's working on the article now. Showed that when you did a TFA, teacher technique feature analysis score of an activity from a course book, it can score differently when the activity is used in the classroom by teachers, so teachers can have an impact. 2 more things. In a study looking at training Vietnamese learners to use corpus tools and online dictionaries around collocations, you can tweak an activity to train people to make sure that they know what they're doing. What we found in that study is that the people who were trained in using the tools and spotting collocations and understanding what they were used more multi-word units in their writing, even though we didn't ask them to. And as I said, teachers can impact TFA score. Right. So what I've done is I've said there are teaching and learning activities that are common in classrooms that can be used to focus on EAP vocabulary. That's good. We can analyze them to see how useful they are for retention of vocabulary, for encountering vocabulary, and the technique feature analysis can help you do that. There are 18 questions, and you can have an impact on the TFA score, so you can improve the chances that learners will learn vocabulary by making some changes to your activity that you're going to use in class. Okay, last thing I'm going to do is think about AI in teaching practice. And this is part of this book that I told you about of Introduction to EAP. So I was using a Gen AI tool, and I said, here's a target word. Foundation can be tricky for students. It's a general academic vocabulary item. So I said, I prompted the tool and said, I'm teaching a general academic purposes class. I'm really interested in the word foundation, and I'm going to show you some examples of what the AI tool said. So I want you to think about what ways does this activity encourage learners to engage with the uses of the word foundation. Think about that technique feature analysis, and then how might you use the tool in a more sharpened way. So Gen AI said, oh, you've asked me about foundation. It's used in a lot of contexts and has an underlying basis of something, and then gave me some concordance lines. And here are the concordance lines. Research and theory concordance line. Here are some examples. Historical philosophical context. Here's foundation being used in that way, and here's foundation being used in that way. Now, if you're an English for academic purposes teacher, what do you think about these examples that the AI tool came up with for the word foundation? Do you think learners are going to understand what the AI tool has come up with? What do you think? Put your examples, put your answers in the chat. What do you think? Would your learners know? Probably not. Thanks, Elena. Now, if your vocabulary size is not very big, then you're certainly not going to be able to follow this. So I said, okay, AI tool, give it another go. What happens if you simplify this for language learners? And I put a couple of lambs there as some examples of that. So then they went, okay. So here's an example from advanced maths. You need a good foundation, right? And then it provides a bit more context and an explanation. If you're learning a language, you need a foundation for grammar, and then there's a bit more explanation. Building a structure, you can see what it's doing, what the tool is doing in terms of saying, well, okay, maybe we need examples from different subject areas, and in the language that's being used is not as dense and difficult and provides more examples. Okay, that's good. So then I asked for a vocabulary task, and the AI tool said, oh, okay, so on the left-hand side, I've got these examples, and on the right-hand side, I'm going to give you some common core meanings of the word foundation. And what it was asking learners to do, of course, is to read the sentences on the left and decide what's the correct meaning of foundation on the right-hand side, right? I'll give you a few seconds to take a look at that. Okay, now if we take this activity and we apply the technique feature analysis where we match the meanings in the examples, what I want you to do now is do a quick score. What do you think that would be? And I'm going to give you a minute. We need to have some time for questions, but have a look and have a think. What would the score be based on what you think? I'll do the same. Okay. Now, has anybody been brave enough? No. Okay. All right. So when we look at this, I think one of the key points is that we don't see much evidence of retrieval there, right? So you've got, there's the word and there are some meanings. So not so sure about that. So we wouldn't score much about that. Learners aren't generating any language there. We might have some successful form and meaning going on. There's not much real noticing. So your learners would have to know that the keyword is foundation there. There may be some awareness of vocabulary learning. Yep. Is there a clear vocabulary learning goal? Matching doesn't really score very high on retaining vocabulary. Doesn't really score very high on motivating learning either, and learners don't select the words. So you and I both know, we'd then go back to the tool to get it to the Gen AI tool to sharpen the activity so that there's much more generation going on. So you'd have some sort of use activity after that. For example, getting learners to negotiate which ones they get them to do the activity together. You know, there are ways of doing these things. Okay. I wanted to show you a couple of other online tools very quickly. On the right-hand side is the feather pattern from one of our parrots called the kakapo. It's absolutely beautiful. I'm sure it's a kakapo. On the left-hand side, this is a mind map from the academic collocation list. And what you do there is you type the target word that you want to get a mind map from. So I put the word analysis in there. It's in the academic word list, for example. So then the academic collocation list, the mind map tool pulls out all of the collocations which are common to the word analysis. So it's another way of presenting data to students. I mentioned academic highlighter and gap fill tool. If you want to try those ones out, you can see them there, or you can make a tag cloud. So all of these kinds of tools are really easily available, and you can be using them in your classroom with your students, and you can even get them to run their own texts through, for example, an academic word list highlighter or an academic vocabulary list highlighter, so learners can see whether they're using academic vocabulary in their writing or not. Now, I was going to suggest that you had a bit of a play with the Gen AI tools. I'm going to give this to you for you to do part of your homework. Select a tool, ask it to create an academic vocabulary classroom activity or a writing activity, for example, or a reading activity. It's quite interesting what it provides. Use the technique feature analysis to critique it and tweak it up a little bit, see whether or not the Gen AI tool will help you with that. Check the TFA score. Has it improved? When you do this work with the activity, does it get any better? And have a good think, because that's one of the great things about teaching, right? Is that we learn as we teach. What changes you make to an activity before or after you take it into the classroom? So I want to finish up with the key things to think about. When we're thinking about increasing opportunities for learning. What do learners need? They need vocabulary. It's related to their own learning needs. They need lots of repetition. We know this. When we learn our first language, that's what our caregivers and parents do for us, right? They talk to us, lots of repetition, lots of encountering words and listening and reading. That's not enough. You also need to use them in writing and speaking so that it all becomes part of them. Spaced retrieval, so lots of opportunities for remembering the meaning or the form of words and using your memory for that. And you're trying to build your knowledge of vocabulary, single words and multi-word units. You need to understand that learning vocabulary involves form of the word, the meaning of the word, and how to use the word. Personalization is really important, because if you don't know much about a subject, you've got not much to go on. Lots of examples, images there. People need choices of what they do, so they get a bit more ownership of the activities, a lot more teamwork and negotiation, and avoiding interference between words so that we don't set people up for failure. Okay, that leaves us 5 minutes. So what I've got for you is 2 questions. One is, what were 2 key points from today's session for you? And I'm going to give you a minute now to make a note in the chat there. Was there anything? Oh, somebody's coming late. I'm so sorry. TFA, yep. So the technique feature analysis. Thanks, Danny. One thing you're going to remember. That's awesome. Anything else? Vocabulary tasks. Yep. Yep. That you can change it. You have the power. You can change it. You can also talk to your students about TFA as well. Good. I'm glad you found that really valuable. Fabulous. Yeah. So it's great that you've got some ideas there about the things that I was talking about. Do you also have some questions that you might have? And that's going to be the second point. TFA and the links, awesome. Oh, that's the other thing, is make sure you tell your friends. So if there's something that you learned today, please go and tell your teaching friends about it, because that's the way people learn. And often post-pandemic, we don't see anybody or talk much anymore about things. So please make sure you share the ideas.
Averil, thank you so much. There's a question in the Q&A box already. If you just click on Q&A, you'll be able to pop it open.
I'll go to the more. Oh yeah, oh look at that.
Yeah, and if other people have questions, if you put them in the Q&A, they won't get lost in the chat. We'll be able to see them more easily.
So Danny's asking, is there a distinction between high frequency general vocabulary and high frequency academic vocabulary, or do these coexist? They coexist, Danny. They coexist for several reasons. One is, if you think about the word line, this is a bit of an odd example, but I've done a lot of research in trades vocabulary. So line in English is a high frequency word. And if you think about it from a classroom context, you might say, oh, a line like underline or draw a line. But if you take that word into the trades context in carpentry, if you line a wall, you're not drawing lines on it in any way, right? You're doing something highly specific. So a word like line in general English might mean something, but in specific purposes might mean something quite different. So that's why we've tried to draw up word lists based on corpora for specific subject areas and used technical meaning as being the main way of differentiating that vocabulary. One of the things that one of our PhD candidates did here in New Zealand was looking at the proportion of medical vocabulary in the first 1,000 words of English. Now, this is just off the top of my head. I think she found 15% of a high frequency English general word list was specific medical vocabulary. So I'm saying two things. First thing, a technical word may also be high frequency, but in different subject areas. So it's hard to pull them apart. Second thing is there can be a lot of technical meanings associated with high frequency words, and it might there might be more than you think. So I don't think anybody's done that research. I think it's a really good question. Can I give you an example of interference? Yes, I can. I'm gonna type an answer. My second language is Hungarian. I had a teacher of Hungarian who said to me once in class, here's the word hideg. Oh, I've lost it. She gave me two words, hideg and meleg. And she said, one means hot, one means cold. And I thought, oh, which one means hot and which one's mean cold? English is hot. Maybe hideg means hot because it starts with the same sound. Wrong. And then I looked at it and thought, well, they've both got eggs in them. Hidag, melag, maybe that's what it is. But that's really confusing because they both look the same and sound. It's fairly similar looking words. So these words are opposites because I was presented with them at the same time with really unclear instructions. Even though I'm an okay language learner, it was like, oh, I don't even know how do I start? So what I decided to do was to learn the word cold because the weather was cold. I took charge of my own learning. I learned the word hidag means cold. And then I started to use words like nodyon hidag, meaning it's very cold now. And then as the weather got warmer, I started to say nem nodyon hidag most, meaning it's not very cold now. And then once I was really firmly established with the word hidag, I learned the word malag. So even as somebody who's pretty okay, I got very mixed up. We see it often with up and down. People mix that up all of the time. So words that look the same and sound the same, it's really easy to mix them up. Learners should always go with the high frequency word first. Yeah. Huang saying learners often feel pressure to use complicated or less frequent words. Yeah, they really need those high frequency words. If they don't have the high frequency words, it's even harder for them. One of the things that we've found about spoken academic vocabulary, for example, so Yendang's spoken academic word list covers about 90 to 92% of academic spoken English. That word list contains a lot of high frequency words in English. So there's a big overlap there. That's really important. So I'd be talking with learners about the research that we've done on spoken academic vocabulary. It's mostly high frequency words. So there's a good reason for that. When we're speaking like this, my main purpose is so that people understand me. If I speak like a thesaurus or an encyclopedia or a textbook, my message doesn't come through, right? So I think we have to think about it with learners to say, how are you conveying your message? What's the language that you're using? If it's a written text, does it contain much academic vocabulary? If it's 90% academic vocabulary, it's probably not comprehensible. You want to drop it down. So I think there's something to be said for learners to really understand the nature of academic vocabulary. Scaffolding of activities. Joanna, I'm not quite sure what you mean. Do you want me to talk about scaffolding? I would be looking at making sure that any activity includes elements of the TFA as part of my scaffolding thing. I would make sure that we have units of work that people are gaining really deep knowledge of vocabulary along with the use of vocabulary, and that it's a really clear part of what we do. I'd be making sure there's more assessment of vocabulary because it doesn't tend to get assessed. So therefore we don't know much about what learners know, and they don't know how much they know. So for example, the Pecorari test that I mentioned, and hopefully on the chat somebody's picked that up, that will be good. Vocab apps with Anki and Quizlet. I know from my EAP colleagues when they use them, they're reasonably successful, and it's the usual thing. Some learners will pick up these tools and run with them and love them. That's fantastic. Others will try them and not much happens. So we really have to have a whole lot of things going on for learners so that they understand. Anton saying our curriculum relies heavily on exposing learners to authentic academic texts. Do these have interference items? Should it be using graded text? I'm not sure what you mean by interference. So interference means that words that are looking the same, sounding the same, or opposites are easy to get mixed up. So there's that. Authentic text, I think you should look at the early data in the presentation of the number of word families you need to know in order to recognize or in order to understand texts. So if you test learners' vocabulary size using the vocabulary size test, that's easy to find. You can go to a website called my.vocabulary size, and learners can take vocabulary size test. You can find out how many words people recognize roughly. And then you can say, well, if your vocabulary size is around 2,000 word families and I'm presenting authentic academic text that you need 8,000 word families to reach 98% coverage, your texts are far too hard for them. And you should be using graded text. Okay. You can use TFA for general English students as well. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think I've answered all the questions. Sophie, do you want me to stop sharing? Are you there? Is there anybody
Yes,
still here?
I'm here. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Averil, there's so many positive comments in the chat of from people saying that this has been incredibly useful. And I think it was just such a comprehensive overview of the key considerations in the field of academic vocabulary, which we expected, given your academic background. But I think that the way you linked it to our context was really generous and so useful for us. So, you know, things about the analysis of how textbooks deal with academic vocabulary, different tips for teachers when working with academic vocabulary, such as the technique, feature analysis, scoring, and even the online tools and Gen AI tools that you mentioned for building activities to practice academic vocabulary were just so useful for us. So thank you so much for
Pleasure.
that. And we've all got a lot out of it.
Great. Thank you so much again
Yeah.
for the invitation. And
Yeah.
to all you teachers out there, keep going. You're working hard. I know you are. We see you and we appreciate you. And I'm just so delighted. Anytime I can talk to teachers is just a joy for me. You can hear it in my voice, right? So
Yeah.
thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to read quickly through the chat now because I just wanted to get a sense of who was here. But thank you so much, everybody. I'll turn off the audio. Kia kaha, kia manawanui, be kind, be patient, and be brave. Thank you very much, everybody. Go well.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us.